He never said much, never raised his hand, never tried to stand out. In a world where loud kids ruled the classroom and silence was mistaken for weakness, Darius Reed wore his hoodie like a shield soft, faded, and pulled just low enough to keep the world out. They thought he was distracted. They thought he was lazy. They thought he was nothing but another quiet black boy zoning out in the back row. But Darius wasn't ignoring the lesson, he was rewriting it in his mind. And one day, when a teacher called him out to embarrass him in front of everyone, when the chalk screeched across the whiteboard with an impossible equation meant to break his pride, he didn't flinch. He picked up the marker, and what happened next silenced the whole room. Because what they didn't know is this: he wasn't just smart, he was brilliant, and the hoodie they mocked, that hoodie belonged to a genius. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Bradford Middle School smelled like floor polish, cafeteria grease, and teenage boredom, the kind of place where time dragged and lockers slammed more often than doors opened to opportunity. Room 214 was no different. It buzzed with the sound of shuffling backpacks, whispered side conversations, and the low hum of fluorescent lights that never quite stayed quiet. In the very back, by the window, Darius Reed sat, 13 years old, black, hoodie up. He always sat there, not because he was hiding, but because he learned that being overlooked was sometimes safer than being seen. His notebook lay open, half filled with scribbles no teacher ever asked about, not class notes, not doodles, equations, the kind most kids wouldn't understand even if they tried. But no one tried. They didn't ask why he never spoke, why he stared out the window during lectures, why his tests were always perfect, even though his hand was never in the air. To them, he was just another hoodie, another quiet kid, another shadow in the back row. Outside, fall was creeping into Charlotte. Golden leaves scattered across the parking lot, and a cool breeze pushed through cracked windows. Darius stared at the sky like it had answers no one else could hear. His thoughts ran faster than the lesson. While his classmates were learning how to simplify variables, Darius was mapping multidimensional matrices in the margin of his math book just to see if he could. He didn't care for applause, didn't need attention. He just needed space. Space to think, to breathe, to be. But not everyone liked that kind of silence. Miss Whitmore, the teacher, stood at the front of the room with her usual pressed blouse and forced patience. She wasn't cruel, not exactly, but she had the look of someone who didn't like puzzles she couldn't solve, and to her, Darius was a riddle that refused to answer. That morning, she graded the latest math quiz. Most of the class had flopped. The average was barely a D. And yet, one paper had a perfect score. Again, she stared at the name at the top, Darius Reed, the same kid who never looked her in the eye, never participated, never showed his work. To her, it felt like arrogance, like defiance in disguise. She slapped the stack of graded papers onto her desk and looked up at the room. "Class," she said sharply, "we need to talk." Chairs shifted, eyes rolled. The room dimmed under the weight of impending blame. "Most of you," she continued, "didn't even come close to passing, which tells me some of you aren't taking this seriously." Her gaze drifted slowly, deliberately to the back of the room. Or worse, some of you think you're too smart to bother. Darius didn't flinch. He just kept looking out the window, one hand propping up his chin. The breeze outside made the branches sway gently. It looked peaceful. But inside war drums, Darius Reed, the sound of his name in her voice, snapped the room silent. He blinked, pulled his eyes from the clouds, and turned toward her. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "Would you like to share what's so fascinating out there?" A few kids chuckled. Darius stayed quiet. "Ms. Whitmore crossed her arms. "I've got a better idea. Why don't you come up here and show the class how it's done?" The room shifted again, but this time it was energy, low whispers, a stifled laugh, sneakers squeaking on tile as students leaned in for the show. One boy muttered, "He's about to get wrecked." Another whispered, "He never talks. Bet he don't even know what chapter we on." Darius stood slowly. His hoodie hung like a cape over his frame. Not flashy, just worn and soft like armor. He didn't look scared. He didn't look mad. He just moved, quiet, deliberate, like someone who already knew how this would end. At the front of the room, Ms. Whitmore picked up the marker. She didn't pick something from the book, didn't choose a review problem. No, this was personal. She turned to the board and began writing a long, twisted equation, something well beyond eighth grade level. When she finished, she turned back and handed him the marker. "Go ahead," she said, lips tight. "Show us what all that silence is hiding." Darius took the marker. He looked at the board, then back at the class. Their eyes burned through him, not with interest, with expectation. They expected failure. And maybe that's exactly why he smiled. He stood there, marker in hand, facing a board that was never meant to be solved. Not by someone like him, not by a kid in a hoodie, not by a quiet black boy they'd already written off as invisible. The equation stretched across the board like a challenge, a trap disguised as a test, exponents tangled with variables, parentheses nested like a puzzle box. This wasn't education, it was a performance. And the audience, they were hungry. A few kids smirked. One girl pulled out her phone, ready to capture the fall, not because she hated Darius, but because in middle school, shame spreads faster than fire. But Darius, he didn't blink, didn't stutter. He just breathed. One deep inhale, then silence. The kind of silence that doesn't beg for attention, but demands it. He stared at the equation, then slowly stepped forward, and in the soft scratch of marker on whiteboard, the world shifted. First came the structure. He broke the equation down, grouped similar terms, simplified where he could, not rushing, not panicking. His wrist moved in calm loops, like he'd done this 1,000 times. Then came the shortcuts, the tricks only someone fluent in numbers would know. He factored what didn't need to be factored. He rearranged what wasn't supposed to be touched. He didn't just solve the problem, he refined it, line after line. The chaos untangled. And by the time he wrote the final answer, the only sound in the room was the hum of the overhead lights. Ms. Whitmore's arms had fallen to her sides. Her mouth was closed, but her eyes said everything. Shock, confusion, pride, maybe, but hidden beneath something heavier, embarrassment. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had tried to expose him. Instead, he had exposed everyone else their assumptions, their biases, their need to make quiet kids prove they belonged. Darius stepped back from the board. Still no words, no mic drop, no smirk, no "I told you so," just calm, like solving that kind of math problem was as normal as tying his shoes. He turned to Miss Whitmore, held out the marker politely. She hesitated, then took it, fingers slow and unsure. A beat passed, and then, from somewhere near the middle of the room, a boy muttered, "Damn." A few others laughed nervously. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was something else, a kind of respect that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Mrs. Whitmore cleared her throat. "Well then," she said, voice cracking slightly before she found her tone again. "Thank you. Darius, you can take your seat." Darius nodded. Not smug, not shy, just still Darius. He walked back to his desk, hoodie still loose over his head, face calm, not a single word. He sat back down, pulled his notebook over, and resumed where he left off, staring out the window. But the class wasn't the same anymore. Now they were staring at him, not with ridicule, not with pity, but with curiosity. Some of them realized, for the first time, that the smartest kid in the room wasn't the loudest, or the one always raising his hand, or the one who bragged about their grades. It was the kid who never needed to prove anything at all, until someone forced him to. The bell rang. Students rushed out, backpacks flung over shoulders, chatter resuming like nothing had happened. But for a few of them, something had, something unspoken, something shifted. Later that afternoon, in the teacher's lounge, Miss Whitmore sat with her mug of tea untouched. She stared at the floor for a moment before pulling out Darius's quiz again. Perfect. Again. No mistakes. No extra credit attempted. Just perfection. And she realized something that made her throat tighten. She had never really seen him. He wasn't invisible because he lacked value. He was invisible because no one had ever looked close enough to notice his light. And when that light finally burned through, it did so without asking permission. Darius, meanwhile, walked home alone. The wind tugged gently at the corners of his hoodie. He didn't replay the moment, didn't relive the silence. He just walked, hands in pockets, back straight, mind already solving another puzzle. Because he hadn't proven anything for them, he'd done it to remind himself that even in a world that tries to box him in, he still had the power to redraw the lines. The next day, nothing had changed on the surface. Same school, same hallway, same peeling paint and echoing lockers. But something in the air had shifted. You could feel it in the way eyes followed him now. Not mocking, not hostile, just watching. Darius Reed walked through the front entrance of Bradford Middle, hoodie up, backpack slung low, earbuds and no music playing. He didn't need a soundtrack. His thoughts were enough. To the untrained eye, he was the same kid as yesterday, but the ones who sat in room 214, they knew better. Yo, Darius, someone called. He paused. It was Terrell the loudmouth who used to crack jokes about him every lunch period. You, Terrell scratched the back of his neck. You good at tutoring or anything? Darius looked at him, blinked once, said nothing. Terrell shrugged awkwardly. Just asking. Darius walked past. Not to be rude, just because he had nothing to prove. In math class, Mrs. Whitmore didn't call on him once. She didn't ignore him either. But the challenge in her tone was gone, replaced by something quieter, more careful. When she explained a problem on the board, her eyes flicked to him just briefly as if to say, "You still with me?" And he was. But this time, instead of scribbling advanced math puzzles in the margins, he actually followed along. He didn't need the review, but something about the moment before still lingered. It had opened a door. After class, Miss Whitmore stopped him at the door. Darius, she said, that work you did yesterday, that wasn't just impressive, it was exceptional. He looked at her, surprised. Her voice lowered. You ever think about joining the district math league? They've got spots for independent students. You wouldn't even have to compete publicly if you didn't want to. Darius tilted his head. You want me to join a team of kids who can't even pass your test? Her eyebrows lifted. Then she laughed genuinely. Touché. He thought about it the whole day. Not the offer, the laughter. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't pity. It was just honest. And for Darius, that was rare. That night at home, he sat at the kitchen table with a bowl of microwave ramen and a graphing notebook open beside him. His mom shuffled in after her second shift. Uniform wrinkled, eyes tired but warm. Homework, she asked. Nah. He said, just something for me. She kissed the top of his head, then moved to the fridge. Someone notice you today? He didn't answer. She smiled. I can always tell. You walk different when people see you. He twirled his pencil. Maybe they just saw the answer. Not me. She looked back at him. That's a start. Baby, sometimes people gotta see the result before they recognize the soul. The next morning, something strange happened. He sat in the homeroom, hood up, eyes half closed, and someone sat next to him. It was Riley Green, student council, glasses, type A personality, always sat in the front row. "Hey," she said, nodding toward his notebook. "You working on those nested functions from Algebra 2? He raised an eyebrow. "You know what nested functions are." She laughed. "I do now. After watching you solve that monster problem yesterday." He closed the notebook slowly. "What do you want?" She blinked. "Nothing. Just thought it was cool." Darius paused, then opened the notebook again. "You ever seen an equation with 3 embedded domains?" Her eyes widened. "No, show me." And just like that, a bridge formed. By Friday, people weren't whispering about the quiet black kid anymore. They were talking about the kid who made the teacher stop in her tracks, the one who turned silence into brilliance, the one who didn't ask for respect but made them give it anyway. After school, Darius sat by the window in the library. Sunlight spilled across his hoodie. He pulled it tighter, not to hide, but to settle in. Across from him, Riley watched as he sketched out a function on a napkin. "You know," she said, "you're kind of famous now." He smirked. "Cool. Can I get a scholarship in being famous?" She laughed. "Probably not, but you might get one in math." He paused, tapping his pencil. Maybe she was right. He didn't need to be loud, didn't need to fight for attention. He had something better. Proof. He didn't chase the spotlight, but somehow without saying much it found him anyway. It started like most storms do, with a stillness so subtle, nobody noticed the air had changed. Not at first, not until it was too late. Darius Reed was never meant to be a headline. Not in the hallways, not in group chats, not even in classroom whispers. But the moment he stepped up to that whiteboard and solved a problem meant to break him. He stopped being invisible. And that was a problem for Cameron Blake. Cameron had been Bradford Middle's unspoken king since 6th grade. Not the best grades, not the best athlete, but he had presence, swagger, timing, access. His father was on the school board. His older brother had been class president. Twice. His mother hosted Bradford boosters meetings with a wine glass in one hand and a private school acceptance letter in the other. He didn't walk through school. He floated, always surrounded, always watched, always at the center of things. That is, until Darius did what no one expected. He made a room full of students and one proud teacher fall dead silent with a marker and a hoodie. Cameron didn't say anything that day. He didn't need to. He just watched. The way kids looked at Darius now. The way teachers paused a little longer when calling his name. The way girls who used to walk past him without a glance were now asking what kind of math he liked. That wasn't admiration. That was power. And Cameron had always believed he had a monopoly on that. It began the next morning. In the cafeteria, Darius found his usual table near the back. Already occupied, Cameron's crew had spread out across it, grinning as they peeled open juice boxes like they owned the space. No words, no explanation, just a look from Cameron as he raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, this your spot? That's wild." Darius didn't reply. He turned, found a different seat, and started eating like nothing happened. But everyone around him saw it. The first public nudge. A warning. By second period, the whispers had started. He probably cheated. No way he did that in his head. Bet he's one of those weird kids that watches math videos at night. And the worst one I heard, he's got some rich uncle who helps him. Cameron never said these things out loud. But he listened. He amplified. When someone joked that Darius must have been in some secret gifted program, Cameron just nodded and muttered, "Yeah." Or maybe he just Googled the answer beforehand. It was enough. In middle school, truth doesn't need facts, just a confident face and an eager crowd. In gym class, Cameron tossed the ball a little harder than necessary during dodgeball. When it hit Darius square in the chest, he smiled and said, "Oops, brain lag." Laughter followed. Darius picked up the ball, held it for a second, then gently set it aside and walked off the court. Didn't throw it back, didn't retaliate, but that restraint, that silence, it burned hotter than any comeback. In English class, the teacher, Miss Alvarez, was assigning partners for a debate project, random draw from a hat. When she pulled the names Darius and Cameron, the classroom exhaled like someone had just hit the popcorn button on the microwave. Perfect. Cameron grinned. I get the calculator, Ms. Alvarez scowled. Cameron, enough. But the damage had landed. Darius didn't react. He just nodded and began pulling his notes. They met after school in the library, books stacked, topic printed, chairs facing opposite ends of the table. Darius was already halfway through outlining their argument. Cameron sat down, chewing gum, pulling out a pencil he didn't plan to use. "You always like this?" he asked. "Like what all?" "Intense. Like you're trying to prove something." Darius kept writing. "I'm just doing the work." Cameron leaned in, voice quieter. "You don't get it, do you? This whole thing, it's a system. You make us look bad, and people start wondering if we're even trying." Darius paused, then looked up. "I'm not here to make anyone look bad. I'm just not shrinking to make anyone feel better." Cameron stared at him. For the first time, he didn't have a comeback. He just grabbed his bag and left. No goodbye, no threat. But in his mind, the line had been drawn. Darius stayed seated, alone. The library lights buzzed overhead, soft and steady. He picked up his pencil again and kept working. Because for him, this wasn't about Cameron. It never was. It was about doing what he loved, even if the world hated him for it. By Monday morning, the tension had a name, and that name was Darius. He didn't ask for it, didn't want it, but it followed him now like a second shadow. People didn't whisper because he was invisible anymore. They whispered because he was different. And in middle school, different is dangerous. The school week began with the usual noise lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking, someone cursing under their breath for missing the bus. But when Darius walked in, hoodie up, earbuds in, something in the hall shifted. A boy bumped him shoulder to shoulder near the water fountain. No apology, just a smirk, then laughter behind him, too loud to be innocent, too rehearsed to be spontaneous. He didn't look back. He just adjusted his backpack and kept walking. In science class, the desk next to his was mysteriously sticky. A glob of half-dried glue covered the surface. Fingerprints in the mess like a calling card. He didn't say a word, just moved to the back of the room and opened his notebook. The substitute teacher didn't notice, but Cameron did. From 2 rows over, he watched Darius settle in. Unaffected, he nudged his friend Ethan and muttered, "Guy thinks he's unbothered. He's not." But he was, at least on the outside. That's the thing about being used to discomfort. You learn how to carry it without spilling. In the cafeteria, it got worse. Darius had just sat down with a peanut butter sandwich and a packet of apple slices when a carton of milk slid across the table. Stopping an inch from his hand, he looked up. Cameron stood nearby, tray in hand, a tight grin on his face. "Thought you could use some calcium." "Einstein." Darius stared at him for a beat, then pushed the milk back without a word. Cameron laughed, loud and performative. "Wow, no thank you. You really are a genius." The table next to them giggled, but the sound wasn't full, even among the crowd. Some kids were starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats. It wasn't just teasing anymore. It was targeted, and it was getting old. Later that day, Riley Green, the same girl who'd asked him about math problems last week, stopped him in the hallway. "Hey," she said softly, "you good." Darius blinked. "Why wouldn't I be? I saw what Cameron did at lunch." He shrugged. "Wasn't a big deal." Yeah, but it keeps happening. She hesitated, then added, You know, they only go after people they think are a threat. He didn't answer right away. He just looked past her, out the window toward the rust-colored trees lining the edge of the football field. Finally, he said, Then they should probably be more scared. That night, Darius sat at the kitchen table doing homework. Hoodie pulled tight around his ears even though the apartment was warm. His mom walked in, carrying a bag of groceries and that sixth sense look in her eyes. She didn't ask, What's wrong? She just said, Who was it this time? He looked up, caught off guard. What do you mean? She gave him the mom stare. You've been wearing that hoodie-like armor since you were 9. And you only sit this still when something's trying to knock you off balance. He looked away. It's just school stuff. She pulled up a chair, took his hand gently. You want to tell me what they said? He shook his head. Doesn't matter. She squeezed his fingers. Yeah, that's the problem. It does. Back at school, the whispers turned digital. An Instagram story popped up the next morning, a blurry photo of Darius walking down the hall. Captioned, When you code in your sleep but still can't get a friend. Another post, Bradford's quiet king, ruling in silence since forever. It wasn't funny, but it wasn't cruel enough to be reported, just sharp enough to cut. And from behind the scenes, Cameron smiled. He didn't post it, didn't have to. He let others do the lifting. That's how you build power, not by shouting, but by planting doubt. But the thing about pushing a kid like Darius, you never know what his limit is. You think silence means surrender. You think stillness means weakness, but it doesn't. It means he's waiting, watching, choosing. By the end of the week, Cameron decided to take it further. Too many people were still watching Darius with curiosity. Too many teachers were still praising his work. So Cameron made a plan, a private group chat, a few screenshots, a doctored photo. He'd turned silence into suspicion, because if admiration couldn't be stolen, then reputation would have to be broken. And in the eye of all of it, Darius kept walking, head down, hood up, voice quiet, but deep inside the storm was forming. And soon it would speak. Friday morning, overcast skies, the kind of gray that made the world feel muted. Darius Reed stepped through the front gates of Bradford Middle. Hoodie pulled low, earbuds in, but no music, just static silence. His shoulders moved with that familiar rhythm like he belonged to the background. But the hallways weren't silent anymore. They buzzed, not with curiosity this time, with something darker. He felt it as soon as he stepped into the main building. Eyes, too many, lingering, not in admiration, not even confusion, judgment. Whispers slithered through the hall. He's the one from that post. Did you see the screenshot, bro? I knew he was weird. He kept walking, locker, books, head down. Then he opened his phone. It was everywhere. A fake message thread edited. Sloppy, but enough. It looked like Darius had texted someone from a burner number, saying he was watching everyone, and that he had plans for the school. No threats, no weapons, just vague, enough to panic words. Overlaid was a caption. This dude ain't just quiet, he's dangerous. The comments were worse. Wouldn't be surprised if he snapped. Gotta watch out for the hoodie kids. Y'all ever talk to him? Me neither. And the worst one I told y'all, something off with that kid. Darius stood there, phone in hand, watching his name twist into something unrecognizable. He didn't cry, didn't scream. He just stared. And in that stillness, a fire lit behind his eyes. Principal Darby called him into the office by third period, just to check in, the secretary had said, not looking him in the eye. Inside, Darby was stiff, formal, a man used to dealing with kids who fought, not kids who kept their heads down and aced math. Darius, He began, tapping his pen against the desk. Some content has been circulating with your name on it. Darius said nothing. Darby sighed. I'm not accusing you of anything. But in today's climate, we can't ignore these things. Darius raised his head, slowly. I didn't send anything. I don't even have that number. Darby nodded, lips tight. We're not saying you did, but perception matters. Maybe it's best if you keep a low profile for a few days. Darius blinked. Lower than I already do. Darby didn't answer. He just handed him a pass back to class. By lunch, his seat in the cafeteria sat empty. Kids looked toward it, then looked away. No one wanted to be next to a potential threat. Even Riley, who had once asked about math problems, offered a small, guilty smile from across the room but didn't approach. He got it. He wasn't mad, just tired. Outside, he sat beneath the old oak tree by the side of the gym, picking at the edge of his notebook. His hoodie covered his face, but his mind was sharp racing. Someone did this on purpose. This wasn't a random prank. It was strategic. Someone wanted him erased. Not physically, socially, and in a school like Bradford, social erasure hits deeper than detention. Back inside, Cameron Blake stood by the vending machine, phone in hand, scrolling through the reactions. He didn't post the photo himself, but he knew the kid who did, knew exactly what to send him, knew how to get under skin without ever touching it. This wasn't about Darius being dangerous. It was about reminding everyone who really ran things. But what Cameron didn't see, what he couldn't calculate, was that Darius wasn't breaking. He was recording. Every comment, every look, every shift in energy. He wasn't reacting. He was documenting. And in the stillness of his silence, a decision was forming. Not revenge, not violence, but something far more powerful: truth. That night, Darius sat at his desk, phone propped up, camera on. The screen glowed against his face in the dark. He didn't yell, didn't defend, didn't argue. He just spoke. My name is Darius Reed. I didn't send those messages. I didn't make any threats. And I'm not a danger to anyone. He paused. I'm a student, a kid who loves math, a kid who keeps to himself. And for some reason, that makes people uncomfortable. Another pause. I wear a hoodie. I like being quiet. That's not a crime. He stared into the camera. But maybe the real threat isn't me. Maybe it's how fast people are willing to believe the worst about someone who never speaks. He ended the recording, saved it, didn't post it. Not yet. He was still deciding what the world needed to hear, still deciding when to speak, because when he finally did, they would have no choice but to listen. Monday rolled in with the kind of cold that made kids pull their sleeves past their wrists and tuck their hands in their hoodie pockets. But for Darius Reed, the cold had nothing to do with the weather. He could feel it in every hallway, every sideways glance, every unspoken sentence hanging in the air like static. It had been 3 days since the fake texts spread like wildfire. 3 days since Principal Darby told him to lay low. 3 days since silence stopped being a choice and became a sentence. And now it was going to get loud. Third period, social studies. Mrs. Langston stood at the front of the classroom, clicking through a slideshow about civil liberties and the First Amendment. Irony, Darius thought. He sat in his usual seat near the window, hoodie up, eyes down. He could feel Cameron Blake's gaze from across the room, could practically hear the smirk in his silence. Cameron didn't need to say anything. His work had already been done, passed around group chats and story feeds, with just enough venom to stain Darius's name. But what no one expected was what came next. The class project for that day: free speech in the digital age. Each group had to create a mock social media post, either a protest or a public response, and present it to the class. Role play, debate, the whole show. And somehow, whether by accident or design, Miss Langston had paired Darius and Cameron in the same group. The air in the room went still when she read out their names. Darius felt the shift, not in her voice, in the room. A beat passed. Then Cameron raised his hand, smiling with mock innocence. Ms. Langston, would it be okay if we use a real-life example? You know, something recent. She hesitated. Sure, as long as it's appropriate and relevant. Cameron looked across the room at Darius. His smile never reached his eyes. Oh, it's real relevant. By the time they stood at the front of the class later that hour, Darius already knew what was coming. Cameron pulled out his phone, mirroring it to the projector like they'd been taught. The screen lit up with a slide titled, "Free Speech, a Red Flag." And there, in front of the entire class, he clicked to the image, the same edited screenshot that had nearly got Darius suspended. Gasps, some chuckles. One whispered, "Yo, is that real?" Cameron stood confidently, pointing to the screen like it was a science fair exhibit. This is an example of how posts, even fake ones, can affect perception. Now, I'm not saying this is real or fake, but look at how people reacted. Look how fast it spread. He turned to the room. Some folks think this kind of thing should be protected speech. Others think it's dangerous. What do you guys think? Darius didn't move, didn't speak, but something behind his eyes cracked. Not broke, cracked, like the quiet creak of a dam under pressure. Cameron wasn't just making a presentation, he was making a public mockery, a stage trial, and Darius was the exhibit. Mrs. Langston finally spoke, her voice trying to regain control. Okay, thank you, Cameron. That's enough. But the damage had been done. The image was back on every screen, the suspicion rekindled. And Darius, he just stood there, next to the boy who built a weapon from rumor and loaded it in front of the class. Back at his desk, Darius stared at the table. The bell rang, backpack zipped, footsteps thundered out the door. He stayed seated. Ms. Langston approached. Darius, I didn't know he was going to. It's fine, Darius said quietly. No, it's not, she replied. Guilt thickened her throat. I'm going to talk to the principal. He nodded once, but in his mind he'd already decided something. Talking wouldn't fix this. At lunch, his tray sat untouched. He watched the courtyard through the window, watching how freely the others moved, how easily they laughed. A few students looked over at him, some with pity, some with curiosity, none with courage. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, "They want me quiet, then mock me for being silent. They want me strong, then fear when I don't fold." A voice interrupted his thoughts. You okay? It was Riley. She stood there with a tray, hesitant. He nodded, but his eyes didn't lift. You should have said something in class, she whispered. I didn't need to, he replied. Then, finally, he looked up, calm, sharp. Everyone heard the lie. Now they're waiting to see what I do with the truth. That night, Darius went home, pulled out his phone, and opened the video he'd recorded days before, the one he never posted. He watched himself speak, watched the calm, then he hit upload, captioned it, "This is my voice." He clicked post, set the phone down, and exhaled. Tomorrow the noise would change. The video didn't explode right away. It started with a ping, then another, then 5 more. By midnight, Darius's phone was vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. Hundreds of shares, dozens of comments, and one thing kept showing up under every repost, every story tag, every message from kids who had watched it. Respect. The video was simple, just Darius sitting in his room, hoodie on, eyes steady, no filters, no music, no edits, just truth. My name is Darius Reed. I didn't make that post. I didn't threaten anybody. But even if I had stayed completely silent, people would still believe what they want. Because when you look like me, act like me when you wear a hoodie, And mind your own business, they don't give you the benefit of the doubt. They give you a label. So no, I'm not dangerous. I'm not angry. I'm not broken. I'm just tired. Tired of having to prove I deserve to exist peacefully. This is my voice, and I'm done being silent. By morning, even the teachers had seen it, even Principal Darby, even Ms. Whitmore, even Cameron Blake. First period, the energy was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaos. It was tense. Darius walked through the main hallway, same hoodie, same backpack, same calm stride, but this time the eyes on him didn't carry suspicion. They carried something else, guilt. Students parted as he walked. Not dramatically, this wasn't a movie, but they gave him space, like the silence around him now held a kind of gravity. Even Riley, standing at her locker, gave a small nod. "You really posted it," she said softly. Darius nodded back. "I figured it was time." She smiled proud. "A little sad. You changed the conversation?" He shrugged. "We'll see." But not everyone appreciated the shift. In second period, Cameron sat slouched in his chair, scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight. The video was everywhere. And worse, the comments weren't on his side. Someone had even posted a side-by-side of his classroom presentation and Darius's video with the caption, "One talks, one speaks." He slammed his phone shut. Ms. Alvarez raised an eyebrow from her desk. "You okay, Mr. Blake?" "I'm fine," he muttered, leaning back like he didn't care. But he did. For the first time, Cameron could feel it, control slipping, and it terrified him. At lunch, a group of eighth graders gathered around Darius's table, not close, not crowding, just near enough to say, "We see you now." A boy from the soccer team approached quietly. "I didn't believe it. Man, that stuff they posted." Darius looked up, nodded once. The boy hesitated. "Some of us are reporting the post. It's still up, but it shouldn't be." "Thanks," Darius said, and he meant it. But inside, he knew this wasn't over. Because humiliation doesn't just end when the crowd claps for the other guy. Sometimes it festers. That afternoon, Cameron made his next move. He walked into the AV room where Miles, the kid who first shared the edited texts, sat editing a highlight reel for the basketball team. Cameron closed the door behind him. "You're taking it down," he said. Miles looked up, confused. "The post." "Yeah, I thought you were the one who Cameron cut him off. Just take it down." "Now?" Miles leaned back. "You scared?" Cameron stared at him, then said flatly, "You think this is over? That kid just made a sob video and everyone forgot what he really is." "What is?" Cameron didn't answer. But Miles did. "He's smarter than you. That's what." Back in the main hall, Darius sat outside the office, summoned once again. This time, Principal Darby looked nervous. "Darius, I owe you an apology." Darius didn't say anything, just waited. The school board saw the video. So did the superintendent. "We're reviewing how this situation was handled." He shifted in his seat. "You've done something important, son. Just know that." Darius stood, nodded. "Can I go now?" Darby smiled awkwardly. "Of course." As he stepped into the hallway, a voice called out. It was Ms. Langston, his social studies teacher. "I watched your video," she said. He turned. "I assigned you that free speech project because I wanted students to learn what courage looks like." She smiled softly. "Turns out you taught us." But courage, Darius knew, didn't erase damage, and humiliation, even when countered, left scars. As he walked down the hallway, he thought about all the kids who never posted a video, the ones who just stayed silent until they disappeared into the noise. He thought about them, and he walked for them too. That night, he opened his notebook, not for math, not for school, but for something else. He wrote 3 words across a blank page. They saw me, then underlined it. Twice, because this time, the spotlight wasn't a punishment. It was a beginning. By Wednesday, Bradford Middle School had become 2 separate schools sharing one building, one where teachers acted like everything was fine, and another, quieter world where students moved through whispers, screenshots, and unsent messages. And in the center of that split reality stood Darius Reed, still silent, still wearing the same gray hoodie, but no longer invisible. He didn't want attention, not from the teachers praising his maturity in staff meetings, not from the classmates who now followed his social media to feel close to something they once ignored, and especially not from the ones still watching him, waiting for him to fall again. What Darius wanted peace, but peace doesn't come easy when your name has already been dragged through the digital mud. It was 7th period computer science, Darius's favorite, not because of the coding assignments or the quiet classroom, but because it was the one space where things made sense, where the rules were logical, predictable, inputs led to outputs, zeros and ones, black and white, unlike people. The bell rang, and Mr. LeBlanc wheeled in the projector cart. Today, he said, we're reviewing digital ethics, privacy, consent, misinformation, everything y'all seem to keep breaking without even realizing it. The class laughed, nervously. Darius didn't smile. He was already 2 steps ahead, pulling up his slides for the mini presentation assigned 2 weeks ago. Each student had to bring a digital dilemma and explain the ethical questions involved. Irony had come full circle. When it was his turn, Darius stood slowly, walked to the front, connected his device to the projector. A single slide appeared. When a lie goes viral, no dramatic music, no colors, just black text on a white background, and silence. Cameron, sitting in the back row, chuckled under his breath, but Darius didn't even glance his way. He began speaking, calm and direct. Last week, an edited screenshot was posted with my name in a fake message that suggested I was a threat to my own school. Some people believed it. Others shared it without thinking. A few even laughed. It cost me my peace, my reputation, and for a moment, it almost cost me my voice. He paused, letting the weight sit in the air. What I want to ask is this: what makes a lie feel so true? That people believe it without evidence. He turned to the class. And what makes the truth feel so uncomfortable that people would rather ignore it? The room was still. Even Mr. LeBlanc had stopped typing behind his desk. Darius continued, in the real world, lies can go viral in minutes, but truth takes work. It takes courage to stand still while someone burns down everything around you, just to watch you react. But I didn't react. I responded. With facts, with patience, with my voice. He clicked off the slide, closed the laptop. That's my presentation. And walked back to his seat. No applause. No teacher praise. Just the hum of old fluorescent lights and a lesson that hit harder than any textbook ever could. After class, as students packed up, Cameron approached. Alone. No audience. No jokes. Just a mask of fake casualness barely covering frustration. You really milking this? Huh, he said quietly. Darius looked at him. No? Just telling the truth? Cameron scoffed. Yeah. Well, don't get used to it. People forget fast. Darius stood still, then said, good. That means they'll forget you too, and walked away. But Cameron wasn't done. Humiliation's sharpest form doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from silence that no longer includes you. That evening, something unexpected happened. Mr. LeBlanc emailed Darius, subject line permission to share. The message was short. Darius, your presentation was one of the most powerful I've seen. With your permission, I'd like to share it with the school board. They're reviewing digital literacy programs, and I think your words deserve a wider audience. No pressure, just think about it. Darius read it twice, then three times. He didn't respond right away. He just sat there in his small bedroom, hoodie still on, staring at the glow of the screen. He wasn't used to being asked. He was used to being spoken over, assumed, framed, but this was respect, and it felt unfamiliar. He finally replied, "You can share it, but only if it helps other kids like me, the ones no one believes until it's too late." By the next day, his words were in a presentation given to district administrators. And by the end of the week, the superintendent's office reached out to Principal Darby with a proposal, start a peer-led digital ethics forum, and asked Darius Reed to help lead it. The same hoodie they feared was now being worn by the student, teaching them how to think, not just about data, but about each other. There's a difference between bullying and sabotage. Bullying is loud, petty, visible, but sabotage wears a smile, walks the halls in pressed khakis, pretends to care while sharpening the knife behind your back. And for Darius Reed, what came next wasn't a joke. It was war. It started with an email, not to Darius, to the district's Office of Student Safety. The subject line was simple, concerning behavior from student Darius Reed. It came from an anonymous tip, no sender, no trace, but the attached document that was carefully designed. Screenshots, cropped quotes, bits and pieces pulled from Darius's public posts, edited comments from classmates, even a clipped image from his digital ethics presentation, taken out of context. And at the bottom, the line that would shift everything. This student is clearly capable of manipulating peers and systems. Please review for potential behavioral intervention. It was calculated, and it worked. The next day, Darius was pulled out of third period and escorted, not asked, to the main office. No explanation, no warning, just a knock on the classroom door, and two assistant principals waiting in the hallway. Every eye followed him as he stood. No one said a word, because when a black boy in a hoodie gets escorted out of class, nobody asks questions. They just assume answers. In the conference room, Principal Darby sat at the end of the table, flanked by a district liaison Darius had never seen before. A white woman with tight lips, a clipboard, and eyes that didn't blink. Darby cleared his throat. "Darius, this isn't disciplinary, it's procedural," the woman spoke. "We received some documentation regarding your recent activity, posts, videos, group discussions, presentations." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Everything I've done has been approved. Public. I even got invited to lead a forum." "Yes," she nodded, flipping pages, "which is part of why we're concerned." Concerned. That word again. Neutral on paper, toxic in context. They laid it out like a court case, questioned his intentions, his tone, his influence over other students. Darius sat still, hoodie up, hands folded in his lap. He didn't yell, didn't defend. He just asked one thing. "Who sent this?" They wouldn't say. "Is this about safety?" he asked, "or about control?" The room went quiet. Finally, Darby leaned forward. "This might be a misunderstanding, but we'll need to postpone your leadership in the ethics forum until this is resolved." Darius looked straight at him. "You mean I'm suspended from something I built?" Darby hesitated. The woman spoke again, temporarily, for clarity. The hallway felt colder on the way back, not from the air conditioning, but from the weight of knowing someone had crossed a line, not with insults, not with rumors, but with strategy. Someone wanted him shut down, officially, permanently, and they were getting help to do it. Riley found him during lunch, sitting alone under the bleachers, knees pulled up, notebook open but untouched. "I heard," she said, sitting beside him. He didn't respond. "I tried to talk to Darby." She added, He wouldn't listen. He finally spoke. "They think I'm too loud." "You're not loud," she said. "You're clear. That's what scares them." He closed the notebook. "I'm not mad they questioned me. I'm mad they already believed it." Back in the classroom, whispers began again, but this time, not about Darius, about the system, about how fast one anonymous email could flip everything, how easy it was to make a kid look like a problem. After school, Darius walked home slower than usual. The sky hung low, like it knew what happened. His hoodie protected him from the cold, from the wind, from the world, but it couldn't shield him from the truth. And the truth was this: they didn't just try to embarrass him, they tried to erase him. That night, his mother sat across from him at the dinner table. She listened carefully, never interrupting as he told her everything. When he finished, she didn't look angry. She looked steady. "They want to silence you," she said, "because you've made them see something they can't unsee." Darius looked at her. "What's that themselves?" She reached across the table, placed a hand on his. "I raised you to speak when it matters, so don't stop now." Darius didn't sleep much that night, but he did write, page after page, not for a class, not for an audience, for the record. Because if they were going to build a file on him, he was going to build one of his own. The next morning, the school looked the same brick walls, same flickering hallway lights, same tired teachers greeting half-awake students at the front door. But Darius Reed walked through those doors differently. He wasn't just carrying a backpack anymore. He was carrying proof. Inside that bag were 10 printed pages, a timeline, screenshots, transcripts, every post he'd made, every time-stamped comment, every presentation slide he'd shared with staff approval. He even included a screenshot of the district's own email praising his leadership in the digital ethics forum before they suspended him from it. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was documenting the double standard. As he walked through the hall, students glanced up, not with judgment, but with quiet respect. A few nodded. A couple whispered his name. Even Miles, the AV kid, raised 2 fingers in a silent salute as Darius passed. It didn't change how heavy the air felt, but it reminded Darius he wasn't alone anymore. Not completely. He stopped outside Principal Darby's office, knocked once. The secretary looked up, startled. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Darius said, calm as ever. "But I have a record." She opened her mouth to object, but before she could, Darby's door creaked open. He stood there, suit slightly wrinkled, tension in his shoulders. "Come in," he said. "Close the door." Darius handed over the file. No theatrics, no raised voice, just facts. "I put this together," he said. "Since the district's looking into my behavior, I figured they'd want the full picture." Darby flipped through the pages in silence. Darius watched the man's eyes move over the evidence. His tone when he finally spoke was quieter, measured. "This is thorough." Darius nodded. "So was the accusation." Darby sighed, setting the file on the desk. "We didn't mean to stop." Darius cut in, still calm. "You didn't mean to." "But you did. You took an anonymous email and made it more real than anything I've said or done." He leaned forward slightly. "You say it's about safety, but safety doesn't look like this when you wear a different skin." The silence that followed was cold and thick, but Darius didn't fill it. He didn't need to. The weight of truth had its own gravity. Outside the office, news of the meeting spread fast. By fourth period, whispers moved like wildfire again, but not about rumors, about resistance. Kids had seen Darius walk in with that folder, had seen him come back out with his head up, and now they were watching. In fifth period, Riley slid a folded note onto Darius's desk. He opened it. 4 words. "You started something real." He didn't look at her, just smiled slightly. folded the note again, slipped it into his pocket. Meanwhile, in a different part of the school, Cameron Blake sat in the library, scrolling through a string of emails on his laptop. The post was gone, the fake messages deleted, the original group chat wiped, but the district still had records, and someone had tipped them off. He clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing. People had started asking questions. Too many. And the worst part, Darius hadn't blamed anyone. He hadn't called Cameron out, hadn't exposed him, which made it worse. Because when someone refuses to throw mud back at you, they stay clean. And suddenly, Cameron was the only one still covered in dirt. By the end of the day, the principal's office called Darius again, but this time, the tone was different. No escort, no cold glances, just an invitation. Inside, Darby stood beside a district rep, not the clipboard woman from before, but a new face, a black man with calm eyes and a quiet presence. "Darius," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Mr. Lennox. I work with the Office of Equity and Student Advocacy. I've reviewed your file." Darius shook his hand. Lennox smiled. "It's strong. And it's clear you've handled all of this with more grace than most adults would." He gestured to the chair. "I think it's time we talk about how to move forward." That evening, back at home, Darius sat on his bed, laptop open, phone buzzing with texts he hadn't replied to yet. He opened a new document, typed a title when they crossed the line, "Stand on yours." It wouldn't be a post, it would be a guide for the next kid, the next hoodie, the next silence turned into suspicion. Because if they were going to keep playing the game, he was going to change the rules. Sometimes, when systems crack, they don't shatter all at once. They bend first, quietly, in corners. And in the days following the anonymous accusation against Darius Reed, Bradford Middle School began to bend, but not under pressure from above, from within. It started with a classroom door, room 108 English. On Monday morning, a student taped a sheet of paper on the door before the first bell. White, simple, "We believe Darius. Room 108. No name, no decoration, no drama." By second period, room 212, the science lab, did the same. By lunch, the cafeteria wall had 3 more. By the end of the day, 17 classrooms had joined in. Darius didn't know at first. He found out from Riley, who grabbed his arm between classes and pulled him into the stairwell. "Come with me," she said, practically dragging him. She led him through the hall, turning the corner toward the math wing. He saw them there, lined like quiet soldiers, page after page, taped to walls, locker doors, bulletin boards, every one of them different, handwritten, typed, signed, anonymous, but all with one phrase in common: "We believe Darius." He stood still, eyes scanning the wall. "I didn't ask for this," he said quietly. "I know," Riley replied. "That's why it matters." He looked at her. "I didn't win anything." "No." She said, "You survived something and made us question why we let it happen." Meanwhile, Mr. Lennox from the district had been busy. He scheduled meetings, listened to students, interviewed teachers, but more than that, he observed. He watched who held the power in the building, who weaponized silence, who manipulated systems, and who chose to stand by and watch. On Wednesday, a letter went out to all parents, official language, clean formatting, but the message was clear. The district has concluded its review of the incident involving Darius Reed. No evidence supports the anonymous allegation submitted. The student's academic record, leadership role, and digital conduct remain exemplary. The letter closed with an invitation: beginning next month, the district will launch a peer-led ethics council to explore how students can shape a safer, more inclusive learning environment. Darius Reed will serve as its founding chair. Some teachers smiled when they read it. Others remained silent, and a few, like Miss Whitmore, stared at the screen for a long time, their coffee going cold beside them, because it wasn't just about one student anymore. It was about what they missed. The next morning, Cameron Blake showed up late to school. He walked the halls slower than usual. No entourage, no jokes, no swagger. He passed Darius by the lockers. Their eyes met. For the first time, Cameron didn't speak. Darius didn't either. Because some conflicts don't end in a fight. Some end when one side simply runs out of weapons. During seventh period, Darius stepped up to the front of the class, not to solve a math problem, not to give a speech, just to hand out flyers for the upcoming forum. He moved through the rows quietly, the hoodie still resting on his shoulders like a badge of quiet resistance. When he got to Cameron's desk, he held out the last flyer. Cameron looked at it, then up at him. Darius didn't flinch. "This one's optional," he said, and walked away. That evening, Darius got home and sat down at the kitchen table. His mom had left a plate of cornbread and beans, still warm. Next to it, a small envelope. He opened it. Inside was a card, handwritten. It read, "To my son, you didn't ask for the fire, but you walked through it anyway, and now you carry light for others. Mom." He folded the card and slid it into the back of his notebook. That notebook, the one where it all began. Scribbled equations, half-finished thoughts, truths he couldn't say out loud. Now, it held more than just numbers. It held legacy. Later that night, Darius sat at his desk. Hoodie pulled over his head. He opened his laptop, logged in. The district had already created a new section on the student portal. Ethics and Accountability Council lead chair Darius Reed. He clicked the tab, then smiled, not because he had power, but because he finally had a platform, and this time, he wasn't standing on it alone. There are stories you tell your friends, and then there are stories you carry in silence because no one would believe you even if you told them. Darius Reed had one of those stories, and it began long before the hoodie, before the school, before the whispers. It began with his father. He didn't talk about his dad much, not because he was ashamed, but because people always assumed he was absent, assumed he was in trouble, assumed, because Darius was quiet and wore hand-me-down clothes, that he had no man in his life worth mentioning, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about Elijah Reed. Elijah wasn't loud. He didn't walk around flexing his title, didn't wear suits, didn't need to. He moved like a man who understood power, not because he chased it, but because he carried it the way old trees carry storms, quietly, rooted, unshakable. He'd served 12 years in the military, then 8 more with a federal agency whose name most people didn't recognize unless they worked in policy or intelligence. Now he worked quietly in systems that studied threats, real threats, not hoodie-wearing kids in math class. That Friday morning, Darius sat at the kitchen table, eyes low, spinning a pencil between his fingers. His mother stirred coffee, glanced at him, then said, "You gonna tell him, or should I?" "I'll tell him," Darius muttered. The front door opened, heavy boots, slow steps, then that deep, quiet voice that always seemed to drop the temperature of the room a few degrees. What happened? No yelling, no panic, just gravity. Darius slid the district letter across the table. Elijah read it in silence. Then he asked only one question. "Did they ever apologize to you directly?" Darius shook his head. "Did they ever admit who made the false claim?" Another shake. Elijah's jaw tightened. Just slightly, he folded the letter and set it down. Perfectly aligned. "Put your shoes on." The school hadn't seen Elijah Reed in years. The last time he stepped through its front doors, Darius was in 6th grade, and a teacher had accused him of plagiarizing a reading assignment that was actually 3 grade levels above standard. Elijah hadn't raised his voice then, either. He'd just asked a single question about curriculum alignment, quoted a line from federal education policy, and then handed over a copy of Darius's original handwritten drafts, dated and time-stamped. By the end of the meeting, the teacher apologized twice. Now, 3 years later, he was back. Same boots, same silence, same look that made grown adults choose their words like they were walking through a minefield. Principal Darby stood when they entered his office. "Mr. Reed, good to see you. Please, have a seat." Elijah remained standing. "I'm not here for small talk," he said calmly. "I want answers." Darby swallowed hard. The district cleared Darius. "The forum is back on. We've issued a public statement." "That's not what I asked." Elijah stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "I want to know how a black student with no record, no history of violence, and a leadership role was pulled from class based on an unsigned email. I want to know who approved it, and I want to know what your school is doing to keep this from happening again." Darby opened his mouth, but no words came out, because this wasn't just a father. This was a man who had read entire intelligence briefings with less red tape than this school used to handle one accusation. The district rep, Mr. Lennox, joined the meeting within minutes. Whether summoned or instinctively aware, something was shifting. He entered the room with clipboard in hand and eyebrows raised. "Elijah Reed," he said, extending a hand. "We've met once. Years ago, I was still a junior officer. You remember names," Elijah said, shaking his hand firmly. "Good. Then remember this one. Darius Reed is not just my son. He's a barometer for how this school treats brilliance in black skin." He turned back to Darby. "If you don't fix your system will be exposed." Darius watched all of it, silent but wide-eyed, not because he hadn't seen his father be firm before, but because this wasn't for intimidation. This was protection, pure, focused, calculated. His father didn't come to argue. He came to hold them accountable. When they left, Elijah didn't say a word until they got to the car. He started the engine, looked straight ahead, then said, "They crossed a line with you." Darius nodded slowly. "I know." Elijah glanced at him. "You ready to show them you know how to draw your own?" The car ride home was quiet, not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that fills the space with something solid, like truth, like purpose. Darius sat in the passenger seat, fingers tapping rhythm on his jeans. Head leaned against the window. His father drove like he always did, slow, steady, never in a rush, but always in control. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to, because after that meeting, everything had changed. Later that night, the front porch light flicked on. Darius sat on the steps. Hoodie pulled over his head, laptop balanced on his knees. His father stepped outside, 2 mugs of cocoa in hand, no lecture, just presence. He handed Darius a mug and sat beside him, both facing the quiet street. "You still writing?" Elijah asked. "Yeah," Darius replied, not looking away from the screen. "What about?" Darius paused, then turned the laptop toward his father. Across the top of the document, "When they doubt the quiet ones. A toolkit for black students in white spaces." Elijah's eyes scanned the first few lines. His expression didn't change, but his hand tightened slightly around the mug. "You gonna publish this?" Darius nodded. "Maybe, but not just for me." "For who?" "Then for every kid like me." Darius said, "Who gets questioned before they get heard?" The next morning, Darius walked into school different, not louder, not faster, just grounded. The meeting with the administration had made its impact. Word had traveled fast, maybe faster than his own video, maybe faster than the lie that started it all, because now people looked at him like he belonged, not because they finally understood him, but because they knew someone had his back. And in middle school, that kind of armor is rare. That day, Mr. Lennox stopped him in the hallway. You're presenting next week. Right. The forum. Darius nodded. Lennox smiled. Good. We'll have a full audience. Parents, board members, a few community partners. Darius raised an eyebrow. All that for one student forum. Lennox leaned in. You made it more than that. Now it's a platform. Word spread fast. By lunch, flyers were posted across campus student forum digital ethics. Power One and Silence, hosted by Darius Reed. Some kids rolled their eyes. Others looked curious. But most stopped, looked at the poster, and said nothing. Because the truth is, in every school, kids know who's been wronged. They just don't always know what to do about it. That evening, Elijah sat at the dinner table, reading a report on his tablet while Darius packed his bag. Before heading upstairs, Darius stopped. You coming next week? Elijah looked up. Wouldn't miss it. Darius hesitated. You won't have to say anything. It's just me talking. Elijah smiled faintly. Son, the day you speak truth to power, I don't need to say a word. Friday came fast. The energy around campus felt different charged, but not hostile. Cameron Blake walked through the halls with less noise than usual. No jokes, no group trailing behind him, just headphones. His head down, and a lot of quiet. Rumor was, the district had flagged his student profile for review. No punishment, no formal write-up, but something that mattered more eyes on him. And in a school built on reputations, that was enough to knock a kid off balance. In the media lab, Darius ran through slides for the forum. He sat with Riley and Miles, testing mics, adjusting the lighting. No flash, just clarity. This isn't a performance. He told them, this has to feel real. It already does. Riley said, you're the one who lived it. Before he left school that day, Darius stopped by the front office. Mrs. Clements, the secretary, smiled warmly. I saw your name in the staff newsletter. Big day coming. Huh, Darius nodded. I'm ready. She leaned forward, voice softer. You know, some kids go through 3 years here without making a single change. You made the school look at itself. He paused, then said, I didn't want to. I just couldn't unsee it. That night, back on the porch, Elijah handed Darius a small leather notebook, worn, soft at the edges. This was mine, he said. First mission logs, notes, truth I couldn't always speak out loud. Darius opened it. The first page read, never moved to be seen, moved to be clear. He looked up. Elijah nodded once. Your words can change rooms, but your presence that shakes systems. Darius didn't sleep much that night, not because he was nervous, but because he was finally awake, fully, and the world it was about to hear him. The morning of the forum, the school felt different. Teachers wore button-downs instead of sweatshirts. Custodians mopped twice instead of once. Even the principal straightened his tie before first bell. There was something in the air, expectation. But in room 207, behind a plain wooden door, Darius Reed sat cross-legged in the center of a circle of empty chairs, head down. Hoodie pulled tight, hands resting on his knees. He wasn't nervous. He was calculating, not numbers this time, but impact. Across campus, students shuffled into the auditorium, more curious than excited. Posters lined the halls. Parents filed in. A few reporters from the local paper showed up with notepads and camera flashes. The name on the program wasn't a principal, wasn't a superintendent, wasn't a celebrity speaker flown in from D.C. It was just a name most had read, whispered, or scrolled past over the last few weeks. Darius Reed, student chair, ethics forum. Backstage, Miles gave him a nod. Mic's hot, slides are cued. Darius didn't reply, just took the mic, clipped it to his collar, and stepped into the wings. A few seconds passed. Then the house lights dimmed, and Darius walked out. No spotlight, no fanfare, just a 14-year-old kid in a hoodie, standing center stage in front of 300 people who weren't sure what to expect. He stood for a moment, silent, letting the room settle. Then he spoke. A few weeks ago, I was accused of being a threat, not because of what I did, but because of what someone said I might do. There was no proof, just a story that felt believable enough. And when you wear a hoodie, stay quiet and get straight A's without raising your hand. People don't ask if you're okay. They ask what you're hiding. The auditorium was dead silent. I was pulled from class, questioned, treated like a risk, and some people still haven't said sorry. He looked around the room, not angry, not afraid, just certain. This forum wasn't my idea. I didn't ask to lead anything, but when you're forced into a spotlight you never asked for, you can either run or you can turn it into a platform. He clicked to the first slide, a photo of the fake message that started it all. Gasps, murmurs. Some teachers shifted uncomfortably. This was the lie. Next slide, the photo of his whiteboard math solution, the one they once taped inside a locker with the words, "Silent Genius." This was the truth. Then he paused. And in between those two pictures was me. The screen went blank. He stepped forward. I'm not here to preach. I'm not here to make anyone feel guilty. But I am here to ask why schools are faster to react to suspicion than they are to brilliance, especially when it wears black skin. There it was. The real silence. The kind that wraps around the room and dares anyone to move. We say we value student voices, but most of the time, you only hear the loud ones, or the ones that fit the right mold. I was neither, and that almost cost me everything. So I built something instead. The lights dimmed, and the screen filled with the cover of his guide, When They Doubt the Quiet Ones, a toolkit for Black students in white spaces by Darius Reed. He explained what was inside, how to document unfair treatment, how to speak with clarity when you're being silenced, how to protect yourself digitally, and how to carry truth without burning yourself down with it. The presentation ended with a quote from the notebook his father gave him. Never move to be seen, move to be clear. When he finished, no one clapped at first, because clapping felt small. Then, slowly one pair of hands, then two, then 10, and suddenly, the entire room was on its feet. In the audience, Elijah Reed stood in the back, arms crossed. He didn't cheer, didn't cry, just nodded once, because his son had spoken and the world had listened. After the event, students came up, teachers too. Some offered hugs, others just offered thanks. But Cameron Blake, he stayed in the back, watching, listening. He didn't approach, but when he left the building, someone noticed he'd torn down the last fake screenshot posted on the senior hallway corkboard. Small things, quiet things, but Darius knew the ripple had begun. That night, Darius sat on the porch again. Same hoodie, same laptop. He clicked open a new document. Title, "The Hoodie Doesn't Hide Me." It protects what they still don't understand. And he wrote, they feared the hoodie. But it wasn't the hoodie. It was the voice they thought it covered. And somewhere in the city, maybe across the country, another kid in another hoodie would one day read that line and realize they weren't alone. The truth doesn't explode. It leaks. At first, in drips, in whispers, in questions that sound innocent but land heavy. Then all at once, it floods. And in the case of Cameron Blake, the flood came faster than anyone expected. It started the Monday after the forum. The school was still buzzing. Teachers were still talking about the way Darius handled himself in front of the crowd. Some had even printed quotes from his speech and taped them to their classroom doors. But the students, they remembered something different. They remembered that someone had doctored screenshots. Someone had shared them. Someone had stood in front of the class and used them as a joke. And the name they remembered the most was Cameron. By third period, it was in the group chats, screenshots from old Snap messages, a screen recording from someone's iPhone, showing Cameron bragging in a DM, "Watch how fast this thing spreads, LOL." Someone else posted a meme in the group, a photo of Cameron with Bradford's real threat stamped across his forehead. It was brutal, but it was also what happens when the curtain finally pulls back. At lunch, Cameron tried to sit at his usual table, but two kids slid their trays and left. Another muttered, "Nah, I ain't trying to get caught in the splashback." Even his best friend, Ethan, sat 3 chairs away and kept his eyes on his phone. Cameron stared down at his fries, poked them with a fork he didn't use. Across the cafeteria, Darius sat at a corner table. Not alone, Miles and Riley were with him now. They weren't celebrating. They weren't mocking. They were just present. And that was something Cameron didn't know how to fight. After school, Miles walked straight into Principal Darby's office with a flash drive in his pocket and something heavier in his chest. He didn't knock. He just opened the door and said, "I have something you need to see." Darby blinked. "Miles, what is it?" "Proof." Darby frowned. Proof of what? Miles dropped the flash drive on the desk. Who really made the fake post? And who started the whole thing? Darby's jaw clenched. "Are you saying yes?" Miles interrupted. "It was Cameron. He sent it to me. He told me what to say, and I let it happen. He looked down, but Darius didn't deserve any of it." That night, the school district's digital forensics team reviewed the flash drive. Within hours, they had everything they needed: metadata showing the original image file name, CB fake threat final, JPG timestamps from Cameron's school email, IP, the messages between him and Miles, between him and 2 other students. His digital fingerprints were all over it. And the most damning piece, a message Cameron sent just hours before the story broke: "Let's make him sweat. Kid needs to be taken down a notch." Tuesday morning, Cameron didn't show up to first period. By second, a buzz moved through the school like electricity. He's in the office. Darby's meeting with his parents. "Yo, I heard they might suspend him." By lunch, it wasn't a rumor anymore. Cameron Blake had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. His student council application was withdrawn. His access to extracurriculars revoked. Just like that, the king fell. Darius found out in the middle of computer science. Mr. LeBlanc walked by his desk, paused, and said quietly, "I heard what happened. I just want you to know, this won't define your story, but the way you handled it, that already has." Darius nodded. "Thanks," then turned back to his code. He didn't need to see the fire burn to know it had started. He just needed to keep building. After school, Riley caught up with him in the hallway. "Did you see the district email?" He shook his head. She pulled out her phone, a short message from the superintendent's office, sent to all students and parents. "The district takes misconduct seriously. We commend the courage of students who step forward to uphold integrity and truth. Moving forward, new safeguards will be implemented to ensure no student is ever unfairly targeted again." Darius read it, then said, "Funny how they call it courage." After the fact, Riley smiled sadly. "It's still true, though," he shrugged. "Maybe, but it came too late." That night, sitting at his desk, Darius opened his notebook, the same one he used to scribble math puzzles and quotes. He flipped to a clean page, wrote 3 words at the top: "Power, broken, quietly." Then below that, "He didn't lose because I fought back. He lost because the truth stood longer than his lie could hold. And the truth doesn't shout, it endures." The next day, no one wore hoodies as armor anymore. They wore them as symbols, because what once marked Darius as a target now marked him as a turning point. The halls felt strange without him. For the first time in 2 years, there was no booming laugh echoing off the lockers. No group of boys trailing behind someone like bodyguards. No sarcastic remarks tossed across classrooms like grenades. Cameron Blake was gone. And Bradford Middle was finally breathing without the weight of his shadow. But for Darius Reed, that didn't mean it was over. Because when a storm passes, what matters isn't just what it knocked down, it's what you rebuild afterward. Wednesday morning, Mr. Lennox called Darius to his office again. This time, it wasn't about damage control, it was about vision. You've got an open path now. Lennox said, the forum you built has attention. Community members are asking about you. The district wants to know what's next. Darius blinked. I didn't do it for attention. He said, I know. Lennox replied, that's why they're listening. He slid a folder across the desk. A few high schools already asked about mentorship visits. You'd speak, share your toolkit, help train peer advocates like yourself. Darius looked down at the folder, then back up. I'm not even in 9th grade. Lennox grinned. That's exactly why it matters. Later that day, during advisory period, Darius sat on the back steps of the gym, alone, hoodie up, notebook open, pen between his fingers. He didn't feel proud or smug or even relieved. He felt something quieter, like a storm had passed, but he could still hear thunder in the distance. Riley found him there. She sat down beside him without a word. Pulling out an apple and offering him half, he took it. You ever wonder if we're just waiting for the next round, he asked. Riley chewed for a second, then said, not if we build something solid now. He nodded slowly. Cameron's gone. She added, but he wasn't the only one. Darius knew she was right. This wasn't about one student. It never was. That evening, his mom made fried catfish and cornbread, a quiet celebration in a quiet house. They didn't talk about school. They didn't need to. But as they cleared the table, she looked at him and said, you okay? He paused, plate in hand. I think so, she smiled. Not the same as happy, but it's a start. Then she pulled something from the kitchen drawer, a small envelope. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping. The article about him. She'd cut it out and written on the bottom, son, I hope one day the world catches up to the strength you've always had. He didn't say anything, just folded the paper again and tucked it into his hoodie pocket. The next morning, the school buzzed with a new kind of energy, not fear, not division, but conversation. In social studies, students debated online safety and the impact of digital rumors. In English, they analyzed Darius's video speech as a form of modern protest literature. And in the cafeteria, a girl named Mariah stood on a chair and shouted, starting today, we wear hoodies on Fridays not to hide, but to honor truth. Some kids laughed, some clapped, but a lot of them nodded. Because Bradford was changing, and not because the adults said so, because the students did. At the end of the day, Darius returned to the empty hallway where, weeks ago, he was pulled from class without explanation. He walked slowly, paused outside the same classroom door. Back then, he'd felt humiliated, exposed, alone. Now he felt anchored. He pulled a marker from his pocket, one he carried for notes and math scribbles, and knelt down beside the wall just outside the door. On a patch of paint near the baseboard, he wrote 4 words. This is where I stood. No signature. No need. The hallway would remember. That weekend, Darius sat at his desk, hoodie off, sunlight streaming in through the blinds. He opened his laptop and typed the title for a new document. The fall doesn't end the story, and he wrote, he fell, but not because I pushed. He fell because the truth has weight, and eventually, even power trips over it. Let them fall. We'll rise. He saved the file, closed the laptop, and finally, for the first time in a long time, smiled without feeling like he had to explain why. By Monday morning, Bradford Middle was no longer the same school. Oh, the building still looked the same. Same chip lockers, same flickering lights in the east hallway, same cafeteria pizza that no one trusted. But inside, something had shifted, something fundamental. The students had seen too much to go back to pretending, too much silence weaponized, too many truths twisted, and one boy in a hoodie had forced the whole place to stop, to listen, and to choose. That morning, Darius walked into school to a hallway full of hoodies, not sagged low in shame, not pulled tight in fear, but proudly worn up or down as a uniform of resistance. It wasn't organized, it wasn't planned, but nearly half the students had shown up wearing one, even some teachers. Ms. Alvarez had on a navy zip-up with red stitched across the front. Mr. LeBlanc wore a tech hoodie with a binary code that spelled truth. No one said a word about it. They didn't have to. Because solidarity doesn't always need a speech. Sometimes it just shows up and takes its seat. Darius didn't smile, but his eyes said enough. He passed Riley in the stairwell. She offered him a fist bump. Looks like hoodie season came early. He nodded. Guess they got the message. She leaned in. Or maybe they became the message. In fifth period, Principal Darby made an unexpected visit to the classroom. He looked around at the sea of hoodies, took a deep breath, and then said something no one expected. I owe someone an apology. He turned to Darius. In front of all of you, I want to say this clearly. I made a mistake. I listened to fear instead of facts, and I failed to protect the trust this school is supposed to be built on. The room was silent. No coughs, no shuffles, just gravity. Darby continued, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for accountability for myself and for this system. He turned back to the class. And if any of you ever feel like your voice doesn't matter, look at what this young man built. Let that be your proof. Then he left the room. No applause, no performance, just a reckoning. Later that day, Darius passed the front office on his way to library period. Mrs. Clements, the secretary, who always called him baby in the mornings, waved him over. You got mail, she said. Sliding an envelope across the counter, he picked it up. The return address, Office of the Superintendent. Inside was a letter on Chris stationery. Dear Mr. Reed, we are honored to inform you that your work with the Peer-Led Ethics Council has inspired a district-wide initiative. We will be launching the first Silent Voices Loud Impact Youth Leadership Program next semester. And we would like you to serve as our keynote speaker at the launch event. Students from every middle school in the district will attend. You've reminded us that leadership doesn't always speak first sometimes. It just stands the longest. Sincerely, Dr. Elaine Porter, Superintendent of Schools. Darius folded the letter carefully, slid it into his notebook, and kept walking. Outside, on the schoolyard bench where he used to sit alone, two sixth graders were huddled over a laptop, watching his forum speech on YouTube. One looked up when he walked past. Hey, you're that kid from the video, right? Darius smiled lightly. I guess I am. You're cool, the kid said. Way cooler than my big brother. Darius laughed. Don't tell him that. I won't, the kid said, unless he messes with me. Then he added, I wear my hoodie now too, not 'cause I'm hiding. Just feels like it says something. Darius nodded. It does. That evening, back home, Darius sat in his room, the light from his desk lamp warm against the growing dark. He opened his notebook, flipped past old formulas, speech drafts, and sketches. He stopped on the page with the words, The fall doesn't end the story. Underneath it, he wrote sometimes, the fall is just the echo. The real sound is the silence that follows, and the choice to never be quiet again. Downstairs, his father stood watching from the hallway, arms crossed. He didn't say anything, just nodded once, because he knew what Darius had done wasn't just win a fight, he'd reset the rules. A week after the storm, the school started to settle, not into silence, but into something new, something stronger, something earned. The lockers still clanged. The cafeteria still smelled like old cheese and cheap fries, but the atmosphere it carried respect. And in the middle of it all, walking through the crowd like he was born to move quietly in plain sight, was Darius Reed, still in a hoodie, still not loud, but no longer invisible. On Tuesday, he stood outside the library doors, waiting for the rest of the council to arrive. A few kids walked past, giving nods, not out of politeness, but recognition, like they knew now, like they saw him. Riley came jogging up, holding a clipboard. "You ready?" she asked. Darius shrugged, smirking. "Am I ever?" She grinned. "Too late. You're the blueprint now." Inside, a dozen students sat in a circle of chairs. They came from all grades, different cliques, different neighborhoods, some with bright hair and louder voices, some shy, shifting in their seats. They weren't all friends, but they all had one thing in common. They'd seen what happened to Darius, and they didn't want to be next, not just because it was wrong, but because deep down, they'd felt it too. Darius stood and cleared his throat. "This council isn't about fixing the school overnight. It's about teaching people how to pay attention before things fall apart." He glanced around the circle, "And we start by telling the truth." He reached into his backpack and pulled out printed pages, copies of his original guide. Each student took one. Riley handed out highlighters, and then they began, not with anger, not with shame, but with intention. As they worked, Mr. Lennox stood quietly outside the door, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt. He didn't lead. He just watched, because sometimes leadership means knowing when not to speak. Later that afternoon, in English class, Ms. Ron Alvarez introduced a new unit, Narratives That Shift Culture. She clicked the projector on and displayed a quote across the screen. "To tell your own story in your own voice is the greatest act of resistance." Then she turned to the class. "I want you all to write a narrative about a time you felt misunderstood, or misjudged, or underestimated." Her eyes flicked to Darius, then looked away just as fast. The room got quiet. Then pencils started moving. Darius stared at his page. He didn't know where to start, not because he didn't have anything to say, but because he'd said so much already. So instead, he wrote one sentence at the top. "They feared my silence because it didn't ask for permission." He stared at it for a long time, then underlined it twice. In the hallway after class, a younger student approached him. She wore a pink hoodie 2 sizes too big and clutched her books like a shield. Hi," she said. Darius turned, surprised. "I'm Ava, 7th grade." He nodded. "Hey." She looked down, then back up. "I used to eat lunch in the bathroom because I didn't want to be seen." Darius waited. "But after your video, I started sitting outside, just sitting, even if no one talked to me." He nodded again, slower this time. "Good. That's how you start." She gave a small smile. "You made it okay to be quiet." Then she turned and walked off. Darius stood there a moment, long enough to feel what that meant. That night, at home, he pulled out the card his mother had written him, the one she left next to the newspaper clipping weeks ago. He reread it. "Son, I hope one day the world catches up to the strength you've always had." He didn't fold it this time. He just left it open on the desk. Let it breathe. Then he opened his notebook and started a new page. He titled it "What I Know Now," and underneath, he wrote, 1. Being underestimated is not a weakness. It's a mirror for other people's fear. 2. Silence is not surrender. It's observation. 3. Power used right doesn't make noise. It makes space. 4. You don't have to yell to be heard. 5. You don't have to win to matter. You just have to stand. He stared at that fifth one for a long time, then added a sixth. 6. They taught me what fear looks like. I taught them what resilience sounds like. He closed the notebook, exhaled, looked at the hoodie hanging on the back of his chair. Then he pulled it over his head and smiled, because tomorrow He'd walk through those doors again, still silent, still steady. But now, everyone knew the quiet kid never needed a spotlight. He'd been carrying one the whole time. By the time Thursday rolled around, Darius had stopped being the kid who got accused. He'd become something else, a reference. You could hear it in how students talked. "You're pulling a Darius right now. Man, that's Darius level patience." Or even, "Yo, just tell your truth." Darius style, he didn't ask for that, but he also didn't run from it. Because sometimes, when people finally see you, they don't just respect you, they reframe themselves in relation to you, and that's how change begins. That morning, Miss Whitmore caught him in the hallway before first bell. "Darius," she called, her voice softer than usual. He turned, expecting a question about homework or the ethics council, but instead, she just stood there, holding a mug of tea and a look that didn't quite fit on her usually sharp face. "I just wanted to say," she cleared her throat, "what you've done, the way you've carried yourself, it's been eye-opening." Darius didn't nod. He didn't fill the silence. He let her continue. "I haven't always gotten it right. I've looked at quiet as a lack of interest. I see now it was depth." She paused. "So, thank you for teaching me that." Darius gave her a small, respectful nod. "People grow," he said, "when they let themselves." She smiled, a little surprised at the grace, then walked away. In third period, Mr. LeBlanc pulled him aside after class. "I submitted your guide," he said, "to a few national forums on youth leadership and digital integrity." Darius raised an eyebrow. Didn't think anyone outside Charlotte cared what an eighth grader had to say. "They do now." Mr. LeBlanc smiled. "Because you didn't just speak up. You structured it. You left a blueprint." He handed Darius a printout. It was an email confirmation his toolkit was now part of an educator resource package being piloted in 3 other schools. Darius stared at it. No words, just that quiet weight in his chest. At lunch, the usual crowd at Darius's table had grown. Riley sat next to him, flipping through notes for the next council meeting. Miles had his laptop open, editing a highlight video from the forum. 2 new students, freshmen from a nearby high school, had asked if they could observe. "We want to start something like this at Eastview." One of them said, "But we don't have a model." Darius looked up. "You do now." He said, "It's not about being loud. It's about being undeniable." The students nodded, and just like that, the circle widened. That evening, Darius walked the long way home. The fall sun dipped low behind the trees, painting everything in warm gold. He passed the same old gas station, the same cracked sidewalk where he'd once been shoved by a classmate in 6th grade. Only now, he walked with his head up, not to be noticed, just to breathe freely. When he got home, his mom was in the kitchen frying plantains. "Long day?" she asked, her back to him. "Busy. Good kind of busy." He thought about it. "Yeah, the kind where you're doing something that outlives your own voice." She turned, smiled, and kissed his forehead. "You sound like your father." Later that night, Darius opened his journal again. He flipped past the pages filled with math formulas, video scripts, and quotes, stopped on one that read, "What I know now." He added a 7th lesson. 7. Growth is loud, but healing is quiet. Let both exist. He sat back, eyes on the ceiling, hoodie pulled low over his head. He thought about how people assumed he had no voice just because he didn't raise it. How they thought strength only looked like speaking fast and fighting back. How wrong they were, and how beautiful it was to prove them wrong without saying, "I told you so." Before going to bed, he checked his phone. One new message from Ava, the 7th grader who used to eat lunch in the bathroom. It read, "I gave a presentation today and didn't freak out. Thanks, Darius, for being quiet and strong at the same time. He smiled, not because it made him feel like a hero, but because someone else had learned what he'd fought so hard to remember, that your power doesn't come from being like everybody else. It comes from holding on to who you are, even when nobody claps for it. And for the first time in a long time, Darius slept soundly, because the lesson hadn't just been taught, it had taken root. Some lessons are written on whiteboards, some are etched in notebooks, but the ones that last, the ones that change how people move, speak, and see the world they're lived. Darius Reed had become a living lesson, not by choice, but by persistence, by showing up every day in the same hoodie they once questioned, and wearing it like truth. Friday came fast. It marked 3 weeks since the forum, 2 since Cameron's fall, and just under 1 since Darius's ethics guide was picked up by schools outside the district. But for Darius, the day wasn't about headlines or handshakes. It was about legacy and the quiet moments that build it. That morning, Mrs. Langston stopped him at the end of social studies. "I need a favor," she said. "There's a new student. His name's Jameer. Came in from another school, rough transition, quiet kid, brilliant on paper." But she trailed off. Darius nodded. "You want me to talk to him?" She smiled, more like just sit near him, let him know someone else breathes like he does. Fifth period. Darius slid into the seat beside Jameer without a word. Just a nod. Jameer barely glanced up, hoodie up, pencil tapping the desk in rhythm with his anxious thoughts. Darius didn't force conversation, didn't push. Instead, he pulled out his notebook and scribbled a few equations, casually nudging the page to Jameer's side. The younger boy blinked, paused, then smiled, and picked up his own pencil. That was it. That's all it took. Because sometimes, what another quiet kid needs isn't a speech, it's just proof that quiet doesn't mean alone. That afternoon, Principal Darby invited Darius into his office again. No clipboard, no scolding tone, just a single sheet of paper on the desk. "I've been asked to nominate a student for the district's new Youth Equity Fellowship." Darby said. Darius blinked. "What's that?" "An advisory panel, 5 students citywide. You'd work with administrators on how to make schools more accountable and more human." Darius looked down at the form, then back up. "You sure I'm the right one?" Darby smiled softly. "No, I'm sure you're the necessary one." He filled it out that night, but before submitting, he added a short note at the bottom. "Change doesn't start at the podium. It starts at the desk in the back of the room where no one's looking." I sat there. Now I want to redesign the room. Saturday morning. Darius and his father stood side by side at the local library's community board. They pinned a flyer for the first citywide youth discussion group, student-led, student-organized. Title, "We Weren't Quiet, You Just Didn't Listen." Elijah glanced at him as they stepped back. "You've got your own formation now." Darius looked up. "I didn't want to lead." "You didn't," Elijah said. "You just refused to disappear. That's what made them follow." Later that afternoon, at a neighborhood barber shop, Darius waited quietly while his cousin got a trim. The barbers laughed. Music played. Kids ran around with lollipops, noise everywhere. But someone noticed him, a man in his 30s. Sharp beard, work boots, hoodie over a pressed button-up. "You the Reed kid?" "Right." Darius nodded. Wary. The man grinned. "Saw your video. Sent it to my little nephew. Told him, this is how you walk without bowing." He gave Darius a fist bump. "Keep holding your square. Young blood. Lot of folks watching." Back home, Darius sat on the edge of his bed. Scrolling through his email, a new message popped up. "Subject your toolkit, change my school." It was from a student in Memphis, 9th grader, black, soft-spoken, wrote poetry in secret. The email said, "My teacher printed your guide, gave it to all of us. I've always been quiet, but now I know that doesn't mean I have to be passive. You gave me language. Thank you." Darius leaned back, stared at the ceiling. This wasn't about Bradford anymore. It wasn't even about him. This was movement. He opened his notebook again, a fresh page, no title this time. He just wrote, "The moment you become a mirror for others, you stop being just one voice. You become reflection, you become permission, you become proof." He closed the book, looked at the hoodie on his chair, and smiled. Because the kid they once feared for being too silent was now the one who had taught an entire school, maybe even more, how to listen. The wind was colder now. Fall had settled in for real, brushing dried leaves across the school courtyard and rustling hoodies that dotted the morning crowd. Students moved through the metal doors of Bradford Middle with hands tucked in sleeves, hoods half up against the chill. And there he was, Darius Reed, moving through the blur like always, not fast, not loud, just steady. But now, the silence around him was different. Not avoidance, not fear, respect. He walked past the same front office that once pulled him out of class with suspicion, past the same lockers where someone had posted fake screenshots, past the classrooms where no one spoke up until it was almost too late. Now those spaces felt honest, because Darius didn't just survive the fire. He changed the room temperature. First period, social studies. A new project began: modern leadership profiles. Each student picked someone to research and present, someone who changed their world by standing for something. When it came time for Darius to choose, Mzim, Langston raised an eyebrow. "You've got options," she said. "Big names, civil rights icons, innovators." Darius stared at the list for a long moment, then quietly said, "I'll write about the kids who didn't get famous." Langston smiled, her voice tight. "You might be the first student who ever asked to write about the ones we forgot. I'm just finishing their story," he replied. Between classes, students nodded his way. Some gave fist bumps, others just made space. But no one called him weird anymore. No one muttered why he always so quiet. Now, the quiet meant something. It was a language they'd finally learned to respect. In the hallway, Jameer, the new kid Darius had sat beside, waved him over. "I'm starting a poetry zine," he said. "You want to drop something in it?" Darius blinked. Poetry could be anything, just a line, a page. You already write like it anyway. Darius considered it, then reached into his notebook and tore out a single page, words written in his tight, sharp script. "They tried to name me Threat, but I turned that name into a lesson, and I taught without raising my voice." He handed it over. "Print that one?" Jameer grinned. "Bad to." At lunch, Riley slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "What's this?" Darius asked. She shrugged. "District calendar." He opened it and paused. At the bottom of the flyer, in bold, Youth Equity Summit, keynote Darius Reed. His name, big, clear, unmistakable. "I didn't say yes yet," he murmured. Riley leaned in. "You didn't have to." That afternoon, Mr. Lennox met him after school by the front gate. "You've come a long way." "Darius, I didn't move. They did." Lennox smiled. "Sometimes standing still is the most radical thing a person can do." He handed Darius a folder. "Final edits to your district-wide version of the guide. We're rolling it out next semester." Darius took it, held it for a moment, then said, "Promise me it won't be buried in some dusty policy binder." Lennox looked him dead in the eye. "Promise." As the sun dropped low, Darius made his way home. Same sidewalk, same corner store, same broken fence he passed every day. But it all felt new, not because the world had changed, but because now he could walk through it without shrinking. At home, he found his mom grading papers at the kitchen table. She looked up and smiled. "Make anybody uncomfortable today?" He smirked. "Maybe." She laughed. "Then I know you're doing good work." That evening, Darius sat on his bed with his laptop open, The cursor blinked on a blank page. He was supposed to write a new piece for the summit, something polished, something profound, but instead, he just typed one sentence. What they tried to erase became the headline. He saved the file and shut the screen, because the work wasn't just the words, it was the walk. Outside, the wind picked up again, leaves scattered down the street. Darius pulled on his hoodie, zipped it halfway, and stepped out onto the porch. He didn't need a stage, didn't need a crowd, didn't need approval, because now, when he walked with purpose. They once feared the hoodie, feared the silence, feared the kid who didn't beg to be understood. Now they followed his lead, and he never looked back. The day of the summit came quietly. No parade, no balloons, just one black hoodie and a name now carried with weight beyond the walls of Bradford Middle. Darius Reed didn't arrive with an entourage. He didn't rehearse in a green room. He didn't bring notes. Because the story he carried was one he had lived, not one he needed to memorize. And the truth, it was already written in how he walked, how he stood, and how he never let them break him. The auditorium at Charlotte Civic Hall was packed. Rows of students, teachers from every district, local journalists, school board members in suits, a few state reps trying to look casual in front of kids who could see right through them. They were all there for one thing: to listen to the boy they once feared, to the story they nearly erased. And the strange thing was, he wasn't nervous. Backstage, Riley straightened his hoodie collar with a grin. Still quiet, Darius smirked. What else would I be? Miles stood nearby, camera slung around his neck. You want music playing when you walk out? Something light. Darius shook his head. No music, just silence. They all exchanged glances. He meant it, because silence wasn't absence anymore. It was his entrance. When his name was announced, the crowd clapped, polite at first. Then it grew not loud, but intentional, because applause means something different when it's earned by endurance. He stepped onto the stage, hoodie up, walked to the podium, gripped it with both hands, then looked up. No speech in hand, no teleprompter, just his voice, steady, low, precise. I'm not here because I talk the most. I'm here because I refuse to let silence become permission. They saw my hoodie and built a story around it, one that didn't belong to me. So I wrote my own. The room hushed. Even the fidgeting stopped. I was told I was dangerous because I was smart, because I was quiet, because I didn't need a spotlight to stand in my truth. They thought silence meant soft, weak, maybe even guilty. But silence is a choice. And when it speaks with power. He scanned the room, saw teachers biting their lips, students leaning forward, board members frozen like they were hearing math in a new language. And he kept going. This isn't just my story. It's every black student who's been punished for surviving the wrong way, for not smiling fast enough, for wearing comfort like a uniform, for answering with eyes instead of mouths, for being too much and too little at the same time. He paused, let the air breathe. Then finished. They feared the hoodie, but the hoodie wasn't hiding anything. It was holding something sacred, my voice, and I gave it to them anyway. The room stood, not in a wave, not performative. They stood slowly, as if rising to meet him. Afterward, the superintendent approached him backstage. You've changed the tone of this city's conversation, she said. Eyes glassy, Darius just nodded. I didn't come to change tone. He said, I came to change posture. She didn't ask what he meant. She knew. Journalists wanted quotes. One asked, what's next for you? Darius shrugged. Walking, writing, teaching. The reporter chuckled, then paused. Not leading, Darius looked her dead in the eye. I don't lead. I show. That night, back at home, he sat on the porch with his dad. Elijah handed him a glass bottle of root beer. clinked it against Darius's. "You left your mark today." Darius looked up. "I didn't want to." Elijah smiled. "That's why it mattered." They sat in silence, both facing the night sky, one raised by war, the other raised by whispers, both shaped by what they didn't say. Before bed, Darius opened his notebook again. He turned to the very last page. Wrote in bold, "I never needed their permission to speak." Underneath that, "Let this be the part where the next kid knows they don't have to shrink to survive." He closed the book, slid it onto his shelf, next to his math trophies, next to a copy of the district's new ethics guide, then reached for his hoodie and laid it across the back of his chair. The day was done, but the walk, it continued. Always will. Monday morning came like any other. Birds echoing between buildings, car doors slamming, kids dragging backpacks behind them like weights. But this time, as Darius Reed stepped through the front gates of Bradford Middle, something in the air felt lighter. Maybe it was the way teachers looked at him now, not with caution, but with quiet acknowledgement. Maybe it was the way students made room for him at the vending machine without needing to be asked. Maybe it was just that, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't carrying the weight of proving himself. He was just walking, and everyone could see it. In homeroom, someone had written on the whiteboard, "Monday is Hoodie Day," not for fashion, for memory. No teacher erased it. No admin complained. Instead, more than half the students wore their zipped, baggy, patterned, plain, every hoodie suddenly carrying a shared language. Even the ones who never knew what Darius had gone through wore them with purpose, because the culture had shifted, and in its place grew something rare in middle school awareness. Between second and third period, Jamir caught up with him in the hallway. He held up a stapled packet, the first issue of his poetry zine. "Guess who's on page 1, Darius took it. Flipped through. There it was. His own words in print. "They feared my silence because it didn't ask for permission." Beneath it, Jamir had written D.R., the original Quiet Storm. Darius shook his head with a grin. "You made me sound cooler than I am." Jamir shrugged. "You made me write fair trade." That afternoon, Riley walked beside him toward the gym. The Ethics Council was hosting their second forum this time, with students leading the full discussion. No teachers guiding the mic. "You think people will actually speak?" Riley asked. "They will," Darius replied, "because they know we're listening now." And they did. Students stood, talked, shared, cried. One kid confessed how it felt to always be called too sensitive. Another talked about how hard it was to ask for help when no one believed he needed any. Even Ethan Cameron's old friend stood up and said, "I laughed when I should have asked. I followed when I should have thought. That won't happen again." After the forum, Darius stayed behind in the empty gym, sweeping up discarded programs and candy wrappers. He didn't mind, because leadership wasn't just the microphone. It was also the cleanup after everyone else had gone home. Outside, the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Darius sat on the bleachers, notebook open, watching as a few kids played basketball in fading light. He flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "One day, they'll forget my name, but maybe they'll still carry the lesson. Maybe one kid will hold their silence just a little prouder. Maybe one teacher will pause before assuming. Maybe one lie will die before it spreads." He underlined that last line twice, then closed the notebook. When he got home, his mom had chili on the stove and jazz playing in the background. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "You look taller." "I think that's just the hoodie," he said, half smiling. She walked over, rested her palm against his cheek. "No, it's the way you carry yourself now." He nodded, suddenly quiet in a different way, then reached into his backpack and handed her the poetry zine. She flipped through until she found his words, read them, then looked up. "Baby, I hope you know what you've done." "I do," he said, "but I think it's more about what they'll do now." That night, he stood in front of the mirror. Same hoodie, same reflection, but something had changed. Not what he saw, but how he owned it. He pulled the hood over his head and whispered, not for the mirror, not for the room, but for every kid who had ever been misjudged, overlooked, dismissed. This is power, and it doesn't need permission. The next morning, Darius walked to school without headphones, no music, no distractions, just the sound of his own footsteps, steady on cracked pavement. And when he passed the corner store, the clerk who once stared too long nodded with soft respect. When he reached the gate, a younger kid held it open. No words, just that same knowing nod Darius once gave Riley, once gave Jameer. And now, it was coming back to him, the quiet echo of a movement that kept walking. In the end, there were no fireworks, no trophies, no last-minute applause, just a boy in a hoodie, still walking, and a world that would never forget what he taught them, not by shouting, but by standing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't chase validation. But in a world that tried to erase him, he stood. And that was enough. Because sometimes, power doesn't come from pushing back. It comes from refusing to disappear. Darius Reed didn't just prove them wrong. He taught them how wrong they had been. He turned a lie into a lesson, turned humiliation into healing, and turned the hoodie they feared into a symbol of quiet revolution. This wasn't just his story. It's the story of every Black student who's ever been mislabeled, misunderstood, or mistaken for something they're not. It's the hoodie story, and it walks on through every hallway, every classroom, every silence that dares to speak now because one boy refused to sit down. If this story moved you, if you saw yourself, your brother, your student, your son, subscribe to Silent Power Stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new voice. Share this video because stories like this one don't get told unless we tell them, and drop a comment below. When was the first time silence gave you strength? You've just witnessed what it means to walk in truth, not noise, to wear a hoodie not to hide, but to honor the journey. Until the next one, keep walking, keep watching, keep listening. This is Silent Power Stories, where being quiet never means being invisible.